Our theme word, as you know, is pride, and the texts, Genesis 3 to 11. The primary stories here, garden, brothers, flood, tower, all have to do with forms of destructive human pride. In the garden, it's disobedience. In the brothers, interhuman violence. In the flood, human depravity. And in the tower, attempts at self-sufficiency. These ancient stories explain the forms of human pride, making necessary God's action in Torah and covenant giving, in priest and prophet, and ultimately in Jesus Christ, on behalf of the prideful human family. The story of humankind, having begun in Genesis 1:2 with a good creation, now moves back to original chaos. Humankind scattered and in mutual incomprehension and alienation. Dr. William Power will explain what happened.
The Tower of Babel story brings the pre-patriarchal narratives in the book of Genesis to an unhappy close. The story, which had begun so grandly and majestically in a creation climaxed by God's verdict that all that he had made was very good, has come to a sad and disappointing state. The humans, who thought that they could make a name for themselves and guarantee their own security through the construction of a mud brick tower that would take them all the way to heaven, now find themselves alone, isolated, and unable to communicate with one another. It's an interesting and elaborate metaphor, this story of the tower, setting out the consequences of humanity's struggle to find meaningful existence on its own terms and without reference to God. And what are the consequences? They are consequences that we all know far too much about, that both the name and the security that they sought are lost. Have you ever been in a place where you didn't understand what was being said, and no one could understand you? It's worth exploring what that state is like. Perhaps some members of your group have been in it. It is at least a frustrating, embarrassing, and frightening experience. Some years ago, I was in East Berlin with a little old lady. We had made our way through Checkpoint Charlie and had got ourselves on a rapid transit train. We were alone in the car, and she was obviously apprehensive. Then some German ladies got on the car. They were busily engaged in a conversation until one of them happened to look at us. She nudged her companions, and then each of them furtively looked at us. They said something to one another, obviously with regard to us, and then they laughed. So I said to her, "What do you suppose they're saying?" "They don't like us," she answered. "How do you know that?" I asked. "If they liked us, they'd speak English," she said. Being alone and nameless in a world where no one speaks my language is a frightening experience. And that's the condition in which people find themselves as the pre-patriarchal narratives come to an end. A condition that originates in their decision to find security and a meaningful existence on their own terms and without reference to God. In many respects, this story is similar to the one in Genesis chapter 3, where the temptation is to eat the fruit and to become like gods, enjoying the full range of experiences that gods enjoy, although in that narrative they had been forewarned as to the consequences. But the temptation to go one's own way without reference to God, whether forewarned or not, is well nigh irresistible for humans. They eat, and the consequences are again frustrating, embarrassing, and frightening. One can see them spelled out clearly enough in the man's pathetic response to the divine question, "Where are you?" To that he replies, "I heard the sound of you in the garden, but I'm afraid because I'm naked, so I'm hiding." In either case, both the causes and the results are the same. The humans set out on a lonely road apart from the will of the one who made them. They elect to trust themselves and their own choices. Their hopes are high and all things seem possible, but the results are chaotic and calamitous. Now, in Genesis chapter 11, it is time for God to act, and God will act in the election of Abram and Sarah. But before they are chosen, the text gives us a very brief and surprising introduction to them. They are, after all, the father and mother of the nation. And so we are treated not only to an introduction, but also to a pedigree. The biblical writers, both Old Testament and New Testament, are very much interested in genealogy. They trot out pedigrees at every opportunity, and that, in my judgment, is because they were so interested in reminding one another and themselves of their origins, of where they came from. And usually these origins are not overblown nor exaggerated. They are humble origins. In this case, both Abram and Sarah are traced back in a matter-of-fact fashion through Shem to Noah, with whom God had earlier made a covenant. What is surprising about the genealogy, however, is not that they are descendants of Noah, for they couldn't have been anything else, but it is that the pedigree says so little about Abram and Sarah. One looks in vain for some kind of build-up, some multiplication of attributes that would persuade the reader of their merits, something that would set them apart from their peers, something that would warrant their election. But they appear to be just like the rest of their contemporaries, no better, no worse, a part of that fragmented, broken society that emerged from the ruins of the tower. In fact, if anything, they are a less likely duo to have been chosen than most of their contemporaries, because Sarah is barren. She can have no children. What kind of choice is this? If God is about to establish a relationship with a nation that will serve as a paradigm for his relationship with all humankind, then why choose these two? Why saddle oneself with an additional hurdle like this? They are not only too old, as you will see, but the fact is that they cannot accomplish the task to which they have been called, at least not by themselves. And that, of course, is the point. It simply illustrates what Paul is later to write to the Corinthians. It was what the world calls foolish that God chose to put the wise to shame with, and it was what the world calls weak that God chose to shame its strength with, and it was what the world calls low and insignificant and unreal that God chose to nullify its realities, so that in his presence no human being might have anything to boast of. The choice of Abram and Sarah, as unlikely as it seems, is but the beginning of a motif that will thread its way throughout the Bible. It can be seen again in the choice of Jacob, Joseph, Moses, David, and on to Mary, and the motley crew that surrounded Jesus. For the story that the Bible tells is the story of God's attempt to set matters straight, to reassemble the broken fragments, and to break down the barriers to communication, so that one day, as the writer of Luke Acts will tell us, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and residents of Mesopotamia and Cretans and Arabs, they will all hear them tell in their native tongues of the mighty deeds of God.
Genesis 1 to 11 is the story of the world and all humankind. Genesis 12 introduces, in the persons of Abram and Sarah, the particular people of Yahweh by whom, in whom, and through whom God purposes to bless the families of the earth. Salvation history begins here, and the entire Bible is the record of its uneven progress. Now, do me a favor and take a cue from Dr. Power. Read aloud in immediate succession Genesis 11, 1 to 9, and Acts 2, 5 to 12, and dwell a while on the question, what does this mean?